As an infant, you had one body, but you exchanged it like you exchange your dollar bills. And you exchanged it for the body of a child. And when you outgrew it, you exchanged that body for the body of youth. When you were through with that, you exchanged that body for the body of adulthood. In that body, you found something that was in none of your previous bodies. You found the power to reproduce yourself. That wasn't in your infant body. That wasn't in your childhood body. Now, in this new body of youth and adulthood, you found this new power. But as you advanced into years, you lost that power again. Why? Because now you didn't need it. Now that was not a necessary function of your experience to be a parent. Now you go on to higher modes of life, or different ones. If they're not higher, they're different. And so you leave behind yourself your dolls and toys. Then you leave behind the rattles and the marbles and school books. Then you leave behind the parenthood. Each time you leave behind a function of your life, and you leave behind a part of your body, and you acquire a different body and a different function of life, and you go on. Now, because this is unknown, just about the time when we no longer have the faculty to become parents, we look on this as a horrible thing that's happened to us because it's old age, and now we have nothing left but death or being a grandparent. But in spiritual wisdom, we find this is not true, that everything up to the period of being finished as parents has been only a preparation for our leaving behind the material sense of world with its cares, and a preparation for entering the spiritual unfoldment of life. That is why it is not as easy to interest the young in spiritual things as the older, not because the older are just afraid of dying and want to know something about God, but because the younger still have functions on the human plane which they have not outgrown. It would be a wonderful thing if they could learn the spiritual wisdom as an adjunct to their physical lives. And it does happen in some cases. But very often it's necessary for them to outgrow the physical sense of life before they're ready to enter the spiritual sense of life. Now, we come to this point then, that you must understand your body. And you must understand that you are not this body, and this body is not you. This body is an instrument through which you are functioning. You are the life of the body. You are the soul of the body. You are the intelligence of the body. You are that which says up, down, left, right. You are that which writes or paints or sculpts or composes. You are that which buys or sells. But the body is the instrument which is always obedient to you. Now, in the lower forms of life, the ignorant, and very often the illiterate, the body is the master of the person. And the bodily functions control the person, and the person seems to have no control over their body. But the moment one rises into spiritual light, in some measure, they possess the body. They govern the body. They begin to use their bodies in the directions they wish to use them, which of course by then is always along the line of intelligence and so forth. Now, the body itself is as spiritual as we are. This that we see is a mental concept of that body. It's only a concept because it isn't what it is. If this were what it is, then it would always be what it is. But because this is my concept of what it is, it changes. And one day it seems healthier, and one day sick, and one day young, and one day old, one day pretty, and one day not pretty, all depending on what? It? No. On what my view of it is. So therefore, we are never seeing the body. We are seeing a human concept of body. And so we come to this mystery of the body. And remember that all of this is in the infinite way, in short sentences, even though here it takes a whole book to explain it. This is called Flesh and Flesh. And I hope that someday it will be the chapter of a new book. And it starts with a quotation from 1 Timothy. And without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. And after that mystery of godliness, there is a colon. God was manifest in the flesh, justified in the Spirit, seen of angels, preached unto the Gentiles, believed on in the world, received up into glory. The mystery of godliness is what? God was manifest in the flesh. I appear as body. I function through body. I am seen in the world as body. I am not seen. I am seen in the world as body. I am seen in the world as flesh. Now, the Master's entire message and mission was to teach us that we are the children of God. I and my Father are one. He that seeth me seeth him that sent me. And he was careful to include us in this relationship with God, because always he said, my Father and your Father. The Master knew that his teaching was of no value if it set him apart from the rest of the world. Of what value would his teaching and example be if, literally, he was something that God sent to earth for the purpose of teaching something that we were unable to live up to? I came forth from the Father, and am come unto the world. And therefore we also are immaculately conceived, and ours is the birth and mission of the children of God. We are not mortal flesh as we seem to be. The mystery of godliness is in the realization of God incarnate as your individual being and mine. God manifest in the flesh, which means that God constitutes individual selfhood, that God is the life, substance, and very form of our true being. Since God is the life of your being, you have no godliness of your own, no integrity, no purity, no loyalty or fidelity. Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, and that is God. Whatever your capacities, abilities, and qualities may be, they are of God, and not of yourself. Be not wise in your own conceits. In this realization, you gradually begin to lose the sense of personal selfhood and to indulge less in the personal I. And as you consciously live with the idea that God constitutes your being and that God is responsible for your supply, your activity, and success, more and more you realize that the responsibility rests upon God. Then it is that you turn to the source of all good, the creative principle, the Father within, that God may reveal itself and its plan. Everything has its basis in the invisible, appearing visibly and tangibly. And as you begin to comprehend that fact, you will see that creation is an act of an invisible principle visibly manifest. God incarnating itself as manifest form, not the form you see with your eye, but form. The Master's words were, "And call no man your father upon earth, for one is your Father, which is in heaven." God is the creative principle of this universe, appearing as infinite form and variety, manifesting itself visibly as individual being, and therefore the mystery of godliness lies in knowing that God is your selfhood. God is your self. The subject of flesh or body has always been a puzzle to the world, and great perplexity arises on this point. Where do flesh and body fit into the spiritual scheme? Even in Scripture we find statements such as, "Flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. There shall no flesh be justified in his sight. No flesh shall have peace. All flesh shall perish together. For if ye live after the flesh, ye shall die. All flesh is grass. The flesh profiteth nothing." On the other hand, we find such statements as, "Yet in my flesh shall I see God. I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. All flesh shall see the salvation of God. Let all flesh bless his holy name forever and ever." In the greatest scriptural passage on this subject, the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. In order to understand the subject of flesh and body, we must understand the meaning of these seemingly contradictory passages, which are not contradictory at all. They are no more contradictory than when we read in the Infinite Way writings that God is the only power, and then as we advance in consciousness, we learn that God is not power. When you ask, what is power? The answer is God, or spirit is power. But it is not meant in the sense that God is a power over something, circumstance, or condition. In other words, God is the only operative power in consciousness. God is law. Spiritually, the word flesh means embodiment, or body. Therefore, God becomes manifest as flesh, as form, as individuality. The word flesh can be used in thought, as for instance a law of natural science, such as gravity. The law of gravity was discovered when a scientist observed that every time an object was dropped or permitted to fall into space, it gravitated downward toward the earth, and thus the law of gravity became flesh. It has taken form in consciousness. And the law of gravity, which has always existed, now has a tangible body. It always had a body, because it always existed as an operative law. But now it has another body, a body of knowledge, awareness in our consciousness. It becomes tangible. It becomes embodied within consciousness. In the same way, the laws of aerodynamics and electricity have always existed. And because they always existed, they had form or flesh. They existed as the Word, the invisible and unknown law, intangible, unwitnessed, until one day these laws took form in the human mind. Long before the first airplane flew or the first bulb gave forth light, it had become flesh. It had taken form. It had become concrete, was witnessed, evidenced, and manifest. From then on, all that was necessary was to externalize it in another form of flesh. The moment man knew about electricity and electric lights, it had form, body. Then when he brought it into the external, it had that which we know as form and body, the form and body that we behold. But you see that it must have had form and body in the mind of Edison or the mind of Ford or the mind of anyone else. So with art or music, it has form in the artist or composer's consciousness, definite form and sound and beauty. And then outwardly it has another form when it appears as sheets of music or paintings on or sculpture. Do you see the difference here? We are dealing now with the fact that we are embodied in the mind of God as spiritual form. Then we appear outwardly in some concept of form, and that concept is changeable, that concept is destructible, because it is finite. The principle is the same. The only thing different is its outer form. We have the same with everything there is. Whether we send messages through wires or messages through air, the form in the mind is the same. It takes outer expression as wire or outer expression as going through air. Do you see the difference now?